Hey everyone, this is Eric Harris, your host of the Game Plan with Disability Rights California. We had an amazing conversation with two incredible leaders in our community. Conrad Crump, who is on the public policy team at Disability Rights California, and Tremmel Watson, who is also on the public policy team as a volunteer with just some amazing stories, some amazing background of their advocacy, and I hope you guys really enjoy it. We did use uh, cart captioning, which, for those who might not know, is communication access real time translation services. Trammell is hard of hearing and needed to use CART, and so we made sure that we use that service for this recording. But really hope you all enjoy it. We talked a lot about Sacramento being black and disabled, the communities that we're from, and how that led to our advocacy journeys, and what we hope to see moving forward with all of our communities coming together. So I really hope you all enjoy it.
The Game Plan is a production of Disability Rights California, a space to strategize, organize, and posterize for the future of the disability rights movement. For more information on our work, please visit us at disabilityrightsca.org.
We're going to get started with both of you guys telling us a little bit about um, describing to us how you all were as young people. Just your backgrounds, your upbringing, and just what you were like as young people. And Conrad, we can get started with you, and then I'll go to Trammell.
Okay, cool. Well, man, for me, growing up in Sacramento was amazing. I absolutely loved it. I grew up with a very loving family. My mom, stepdad. Didn't really have an opportunity to know my biological father growing up, but really just had a wonderful upbringing. My parents were involved in the church, so a lot of my community was a church community, and a lot of my family was from the Oak Park neighborhood. All of my family is from the Oak Park neighborhood. My mom is from Jamaica, so she's an immigrant as well to the country. But my upbringing was amazing. I had a lot of friends, a lot of just people around me that loved on me and showed me love. So yeah.
Fantastic. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Oak Park and the significance of that part of Sacramento a little bit later.
For sure.
But Trammell, over to you.
Okay, so hi, this is Tremmel speaking, and my upbringing was pretty cool growing up in Sacramento. A lot of my weekends I spent at Cal State's Park, at Cal States with my friends. We would go skating and things of that nature. As far as my upbringing, I was raised by my grandparents. Not so much my father and my mother. They came a little bit later on in my life. They were systemically impacted. But I had a great upbringing, but I wasn't able to get into sports because I grew up with a heart condition. I had heart murmur, so I had to have open heart surgery. So that made it where I was not able to play a lot of sports. But what I did do is I would spend a lot of my time at the library reading books. And I was heavily into computers as far as like I was into gaming. I used to go to an internet cafe at 5500 Sky Parkway and I would play video games and I would learn how to code and make different websites, things of that nature.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's fascinating. And I've had the pleasure, of course, of knowing both of you for a while, for years, even before both of you coming to Disability Rights California. And it's been wonderful to stay connected with you and now work with both of you as colleagues. And I want to kind of talk a little bit more about the communities that you guys are from, and how those communities impacted you as individuals, and ultimately developed you both as black men, as black disabled men, and as advocates. So, Tremmel, we can start with you this time. What, in your community kind of led to you becoming who you are today in terms of being an advocate, and especially one that cares so deeply about people who are system impacted?
I would say that what led to me becoming an advocate, it would start with because I was incarcerated. So when I was incarcerated, I struggled with reaching reasonable accommodations in terms of like asylum interpreters and receiving captions. So I would have to reach out to the prison law office, which was the designated to help people that the class action members that are disabled in California prisons, and they helped me with my advocacy. In terms of helping people with my specific disability, which is I am late deaf and my social identity is hard of hearing, I came about that just working with the prison law office, and then I got involved with different advocacy groups, and I'm involved with so many different advocacy groups for deaf and hard of hearing, and I really enjoy helping people because of the things that I went through as far as being definitely deaf. I struggled with basically having accommodations, people that were hearing underestimating me. And so that was how I got involved in advocacy and why I'm so passionate about advocacy.
Conrad.
Yeah, for me, man, it happened in a weird way. I would say my first activation of being an advocate was during Oscar Grant. When Oscar Grant was killed, I was living in the Bay Area at the time. I was a student at Berkeley. And, everybody, like a lot of the black students and other students were making posters and signs. And, I was on the same BART path that Oscar Grant would take to go home because I was living in Hayward at the time. And so, I would stay after and I would like participate in making the signs, and they would have protests. And, later on, after the whole Oscar Grant thing happened, there were other things happening as well, like student fees were increasing and stuff like that. I remember protesting at UC Berkeley where the Alameda police was dispatched and the Berkeley PD, and they were in full riot gear and they were hitting people with batons. Me and my roommate, we were actually, if you look on YouTube, I think it's like UC Berkeley protest 2009, you'll see me on the front lines getting hit with a baton. And then that started helping me to understand to use my voice, to wherever I could. That was something that I realized using my voice is something that is one of the most powerful things.
Perfect, man. And when you talk about the communities that both of you guys are from, I think that you can talk about blue collar communities that really have a lot of pride, communities that also, in a lot of ways, are, for lack of a better term, somewhat dismissed by the majority, if you will. What sense of pride do both of you guys have in those communities, Valley High, Oak Park, and kind of what do they mean to you guys specifically? And Tremmel, you can start this one off if you like.
So, everybody that grew up in my neighborhood, they were really proud to be from my neighborhood. I think growing up early on, people weren't as proud to say that they were from Sacramento. A lot of people wanted to say that they were from the Bay Area.
Right.
They first claimed the Bay Area. But I think nowadays, more so that a lot of people are proud to be from Sacramento. The neighborhood that me and him grew up with, we are traditionally, I would say they oppose each other.
Yeah.
So, but me and him, when we initially first met, we talked about that, and we talked about that. And when we talked about that, we thought that it was amazing that we are able to show by example that we are literally. He was in a call. I walked into his office, right, and he had a group of gangsters on his Zoom meeting, and he was telling them basically like, don't let where you from define where you're going. And then he had asked me, he was like, hey man, I know you're from Sacramento. Where you from Sacramento? And I'm like, I'm from the South area. He like, see, this is a great example. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a unique. Well, first of all, I will say, for those who don't know, this conversation, us being in this room, this is my brother right here, man. Like, this right here, this is unprecedented. Historically, you would never see two men, unless they were incarcerated, sitting amongst with each other and having a wonderful conversation, because, and I can't speak to the incarceration piece, but I do know and have heard that for a lot of folks, particularly black folks, when you're incarcerated, you stick with the black folks. It is broken off by race, and so when you're there, you got to stick with your own. So you might be from the other side of the tracks, but while we're in here, we together, But aside from that, on the outside world, with all of us as civilians and some of us, living in underground economy and doing different things that we know, and people that have engaged with that lifestyle, this right here would not be possible without any animosity. So I preface that by saying, when we first met, I asked him, hey, where are you from? And I was on a Zoom meeting talking with some youngsters, and he told me where he was from. And I was like, okay, and I said, hey man, close the door. So he came in and he closed the door, and he said, where are you from? And I was like, bro, I'm from Oak Park. And he was like, for like 2 seconds, we both kind of looked at each other. And then he was like, oh man, like it was love. Like we're not who we used to be. And we're not of that mindset. We've grown, we've developed. But to answer your question about the community, I fell in love with my community because of its rich history with the black community. Oak Park, most people, they've given it a bad, a bad rap, and it has a reputation. People know it for being gang impacted, drug impacted, crime, all these different things. But before all of that, Oak Park was a strong, vibrant black community of a lot of black families who were working, doing amazing things for the city broadly, but in their own community. I fell in love with the aspect that many people don't know this, but the Sacramento, the Black Panthers had a Sacramento clubhouse in Oak Park. There was a chapter there, Huey Newton and other Black Panthers would be in Oak Park regularly. I remember my uncles telling me about how my grandmother used to go to McClatchy Park. We call it the big park. Yep. They would go to the big park, and the Black Panthers would be down there. The post office that's on 35th Avenue used to be their clubhouse. And then they had other spots throughout Oak Park. But my uncles would tell me that my grandmother used to come and grab them by their collar and be like, get home, because she feared for their lives. At the time, police tension and police violence, which is not new to the black community, was happening and was rampant in Oak Park. And the Black Panthers, looked at ways to fight against that, So I'm proud to say that, my family's from Oak Park. I'm from Oak Park because Oak Park is a family of proud black families that have been there. My family has been there since the 50s.
Can you guys talk a little bit about what your disability story has been like, and how it has led you to doing what you do, disability advocacy.
So, if I would talk about my journey as being leg deaf, it started, my hearing loss started when I was 4 years old. So, when I was 4 years old, I drowned in the swimming pool. I had an electric push-start motorcycle. I drove this into the swimming pool, and I was knocked unconscious. And my cousin, he actually found me, and he tried to do CPR to resurrect me. I was helicopter lifted. I was hospitalized for 2 months. And the water, it blew my eardrums. And it wasn't something that was immediate. My hearing loss was gradual. So when I was about 13 years old, my mother would go to the grocery store, and as she was coming back from the grocery store, she would be knocking on the front door for me to let her in. And I'm in my room playing video games, not hearing her. And she would be upset, like, why are you not letting me in? But I couldn't hear her. So that was one way that I was learning that I was, having hearing problems. Another way that I was learning that I was having hearing problems was that I would be talking to my friends on the phone, and it would be more of a strain for me to hear in one ear, and I would have to switch to the other ear. So as I went through my hearing loss journey, it was hard. It was really difficult because a lot of times I wouldn't even tell people that I had hearing loss. I would basically nod away and just nod, and I'm not knowing what the person is saying. So you can imagine how that could cause problems and be difficult. It took me time to actually progress into be assertive and to be able to tell someone that, hey, I can't hear you. Can you write that down? So that was not something I did initially.
Gotcha. Conrad.
Yeah, for me, I learned about my disability later on in life. I said disabilities, identify as having multiple, but, particularly, I didn't realize it until, I was a grown adult man. I'm a father too. So, I've realized a lot of the different things in my life that I've experienced. And now being diagnosed with neurodivergent, disability, it really was kind of like a missing puzzle piece to where I was like, oh, so that's why, these things may have happened, and trying to learn different ways to navigate, whether it's executive dysfunction or time blindness or my sporadic, impulses or inability to sit still. I remember being in school where my teachers would say, you're a very bright kid. They even wanted to put me in the GATE program, GATE, Gifted and Talented Education. But I couldn't sit still. I was always doing something. And, being that I grew up in church, especially in the black church, it's encouraged for you to get up and, stand up or go move over here and talk to this brother or sister. It was something it wasn't frowned upon. But in a school setting, it was like, no, you have to sit still. Right. If you want to go to the bathroom, you have to raise your hand, all these different things. So I just thought, okay, it's just a cultural difference, but not really understanding that, as time would go on, I spent years in community college. I started at the lowest math, the lowest reading, had to work my way up. I say I took the scenic route to education, right. But I went from community college and transferred into the UC and did my thing. But even through relationships and through different jobs, I found challenges with trying to figure out how to navigate just different things, and it would be looked at as, you're low performing or you're not committed to, certain tasks or whatever the case may be, when in actuality, I had a disability, a disorder. So that was something that I realized was like, okay, and then finding ways to manage that through medication as well as through other practices that I use, from using multiple calendars to using timers, to a number of different things that I use that can help me, to actually navigate that. And then additionally, having diabetes is another challenge that, it's like you can't control the way in which your body feels based off of your blood sugar level. You might have high blood sugar level, and I might, like, my hands might tingle or my feet tingle, and or go numb even, or low blood sugar level to where I'm just like completely lethargic and I feel like I'm about to pass out. And it's like a fine balance that you got to kind of maintain. So trying to find ways to do that in addition to all of the other things, has been something that I've learned to live with, in addition to growing up how I grew up and seeing trauma, seeing violence, PTSD from witnessing people getting shot. I remember driving right here in Sacramento on J Street, and I was driving in my Nova, and a bullet came through the car and ricocheted off my dashboard and hit my cousin in the knee. I mean, just like so many different experiences that I've had to where it's like, these are real things, traumatic events, dealing with depression from fatherlessness and like all these other different elements layered on top of each other, has definitely brought a level of challenge to me, but also has allowed me to know that I'm triumphant. In spite of all of that, I've still been able to be successful and show up for my community as well as my family.
That's right. What would you say to them to make sure that they're being thoughtful about including disabled folks in their process?
I would say that I believe that all these different issues, they intersect with each other. And because they intersect with each other, that is why we need to work together with each other. When we work together with each other, we're able to amplify these different issues on a whole nother scale. Versus when we are single-minded and we are just thinking about the issues that we are facing versus the thing that we all are facing. That's right. I think when you made that comment about, traditional white leadership with these organizations, one of my greatest role models was Brad Lomax. And Brad Lomax was a part of the 504 shutdown that happened in San Francisco. In the 504 shutdown, the significance of that is that when they had the Rehabilitation Act, the 504 made it where, you had legal protection. Yeah. And, the Black Panthers, right, they actually sustained that line. Mm-hmm. They came and they fed the protesters. Yeah. They was able to give them their medicine, and they helped that. So, Brad Lomax, when I was reading his documentary, I was actually watching the documentary on PBS, and one of the things that I learned that, when he moved to Oakland and he experienced trying to be a part of disability circles, that he learned that they were a lot white-centered. So he started the independence of living in Oakland, California, with Black leadership. Do you know anything about that story a little bit, Eric?
Mm-hmm. I do. No, it's really crucial, and I think Brad Lomax, I think Fannie Lou Hamer, I think that there are some incredible Black disabled leaders in our history that we need to make sure we continue to lift up. And I think sometimes people will forget and they'll only talk about the pictures of George H.W. Bush signing the ADA with mostly white folks on the stage, or other kind of circumstances where we celebrate white disabled leaders. But I think if for example, the three of us continue to be vocal and continue to spread the impact and great works of folks who had an impact, who were Black and disabled, who go at the intersection, I think that the better off we'll all be. So I appreciate you lifting up Brad Lomax in that way. I was just gonna say, I think it was Jackie Moms Mobley that said, if you always do what you've always done,
you'll always get what you've always got. And basically that is to say, if we keep doing this work in silos, we're always going to keep getting the outcomes that the system is going to continue to produce.
That's right.
If we are innovative enough and open-minded enough to understand that there's someone else on the other side that may look like you but may have a different challenge or might have a different lived reality, but the fact that we can work together and intersect our work, there'll be a lot of people in that intersection or those intersections that will also stand up and say, hey, me too. I too am affected by both of these different things or multiple things, and I'm here in solidarity. And I feel like those are the ways in which we can really implement the change. And I feel like the change starts on the inside with the individual first. You changing your mind, opening your mind, your heart, and changing your behaviors. And then by that, it's like a match. You know, one match lit next to the next match, lights the next match, and the next match, and the next match. And before you know, you have a fire of a community doing wonderful things. So it starts with the individual, and then it spreads out in the community, and then it just keeps growing and growing and getting greater.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I would add that, one thing I learned was an analogy about a candle, right? When I take my candle and I light your candle, my candle don't lose no light.
Exactly.
That's real. That's real. So first, of course, Assata Shakur passed away a couple weeks ago. Was not only for Black liberation, but was a disability advocate, was a leader. Talked about her own lived experience, physical disabilities, traumatic experiences, and the rest. And then D'Angelo, the R&B artist, superstar artist, passed away of cancer actually earlier today, unfortunately. Both of these individuals, because of their work, Shakur with her advocacy, and D'Angelo with his art and music. If you guys could just say anything that comes to mind about either of them, that'd be fantastic.
The first thing that comes to my mind when we talk about Assata Shakur is revolutionary. Revolutionary. She was amazing, and she was into Black liberation. She received a summoning from Cuba. And one thing I learned about, I read a lot of her writings. I watched a lot of her videos, and she inspired me a lot because her words were very expressive, very articulate, very, very powerful. She talked about the oppression from the system, and it really made me look at the system from a different lens. She was very thought-provoking. I believe that she was probably one of the greatest leaders of the 20th century when it comes to revolutionaries.
Yeah, I agree. Just echoing that, Assata is an icon. May she rest in peace. As she rests with the ancestors who have all fought and, raised awareness around not only disability, but oppressive systems, and looking at it through the lens in which systems are designed to produce the outcomes that they produce, which continue to keep people oppressed. And talking about that, being a woman, especially at that time when women's voices were not allowed to be amplified or weren't listened to or what have you, she was very vocal about these things, and being falsely accused of what she was accused of, and being able to move and flee the country and gain that asylum in Cuba. It just speaks to who she was. And then on the conversely side, rest in peace, D'Angelo, man. I'm a big time vocalist and karaoke singer, and I love D'Angelo as he's in my bag. So that man has healed many communities. Black music is healing, it's medicine. And D'Angelo's music just had a unique ability to heal the heart, and soothe the mind, especially with all of the things going on in the world. You throw on some D'Angelo, and it just, gets a little lighter and things feel a little better. So rest in peace to the both of them.
Absolutely. First, we always try to ask if there's a piece of art, music, a TV show, a movie that you're just really excited about that you want people to check out. And I'll get us started by just encouraging people to listen to D'Angelo.
Yeah.
I think his music is timeless. It really, especially just R&B from that era, and music that shows how much you care. And just I encourage folks to listen to and show as much love to D'Angelo as possible during this time. But I hand it off to you guys. Is there any piece of art, music, movie, book?
I would say first of all, 90s R&B is nothing like it. Nothing like it. If you haven't, just Alexa, play some 90s R&B and just sit down and relax. It's just timeless. But I would say for me, there's so much rich history, especially in the Black community when it comes to art. Oh my goodness. But for me, something that really impacted me as a high school student was a book that was given to me by a substitute teacher. And that book was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And it was written by Alex Haley. It was a book that just mind blown. I was completely blown away how Malcolm talked about his reality, his history, systemic oppression, racism, just the ways in which Black folks, navigate. That was something that transformed my thinking, and I always recommend that to younger folks. Like, hey, I know, reading is like, oh, I gotta read, but I promise you start opening it and you start reading it, you won't be able to put it down.
Right.
That's something that really stuck with me.
And it's like you could peep the audiobook too, man.
That's true too. You can go, put your earbuds in if you, want to listen to the audiobook. It's all there for you.
That's right.
Yeah.
What about you, sir?
I would encourage people to look into the PBS story about Brad Lomax, the autobiography about Brad Lomax. I uplifted him at the beginning of the podcast. I would encourage people to read more into his story. He was an amazing Black activist in disability rights.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, the final question, I know we're at the very end, is always, what is your guys' game plan? The show is called The Game Plan. And we try to come up with some solutions. We don't want to just kind of lay out what some of the issues are out there, but we want to lay out a solution or a couple of solutions. So in a couple of sentences, what would your guys' game plan be for the community, for the Black community, for the disability community, for our movement? What would you say is your game plan for these next 6 months to a year?
So I'm working with an organization that's called Activating Change. This is a national organization. I work as an independent consultant for this organization, and I sit on a founding advisory board for directly impacted. So we are working to address the disabled and deaf when it impact them on policing, supervision, incarceration. So that is one of the game plans that I'm working with right now.
Fantastic.
For me, I would say connect yourself to something that's greater than you. Lose yourself in something that's a cause. It could be art, it could be religion, it can be policy, it can be whatever, but something that's bigger than you. get involved in that thing, lose yourself, and when a person loses themselves in that thing, they'll be able to find themselves. And when you find yourself, you'll find your community, you'll find a lot of different things that your eyes might not have been seeing. Different blind spots will become clear to you. And I would just say that for individuals to do that, go on that journey, get involved, use your voice, try to find something, whatever it is. It could be local, it could be national, whatever that thing is, and just try to make sure you're using your voice to then you'll be outwardly helping others and changing communities.
Well, Conrad, Crump, Tremmel Watson, it's been wonderful to have you both on the game plan, and thank you so much for being our guests today.
Thank you for having us.
This has been The Game Plan, a production of Disability Rights California. Please like, subscribe, and comment on the platform of your choice. See you next time.